Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this very interesting little guy. This is the Benchmade Phaeton. First off, thank you very much to my viewer Chris for donating this knife. His only condition was that the proceeds of the sale must be donated to a local animal shelter. And you know what? Autos for doggos sounds good to me. Absolutely okay. Next thing, this knife is a little different than the knives I usually review because this is an automatic knife, and more specifically, this is what's called a double action out the front automatic. In order to pull the blade back in, you use this little thumb trigger, you pull it in. In order to deploy the blade, push it back out. In, out, in, out. There you go. Case closed. And so this is a double action automatic. This is different from a single action where in order to fire the knife, you press down on, usually it's a button of some variety, and then to pull it back in, you need to pull back on a spring to kind of cock the knife, so to speak. This is using a different mechanism, which I explained in the disassembly video, which cleverly masqueraded as a explanation on how the knife works. But anyways, you should absolutely watch that video. It'll give you a better understanding of how this little guy's put together and whatnot. One other thing to note, though, is that because this is an automatic knife, you are in a world of legal pain in dealing with this guy. In terms of things like your local municipalities or state may have laws against it. This only became legal in my state, Michigan, on October 10th, and it's a little less than a month after that now. And so you're going to need to be very careful before you try and buy one of these, making sure you can do so legally and you can own it legally. So anyways, that's the deal. Then finally, of course, a size comparison here. Right here it is against your Spyderco Delica. So you can see this is actually not a small knife at all. In terms of blade length, you're longer than the Delica by a pretty good margin. Right here it is against the ZTO 452CF, another knife that will chase people away in the lunchroom. Right here we have the Spyderco PM2, so pops out there, yeah, beautiful. And then steel wheel cut jack 3.5 inch, and the Ontario rat number 2 in OS8 steel. So anyways, let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, the ugly, and the snick of this very interesting little knife here. So there's a lot of good here. First off, the blade on this guy is S30V steel. And so you can see, I mean, S30V is a steel that is absolutely good to go. It is solid. It is nice. There is no complaining about the steel. And you can see here that it's using relatively thin stock. If we compare it to the Spyderco Delica, it's only slightly thicker than the Delica, and so that's pretty reasonable. The blade on this guy is not DLC, not coated black, although you can get it in a black coating. The shape on the blade is actually pretty attractive, too. You got a little bit of a swedge on the top here. It's a little clippy, that kind of thing. And I do like the fact that they've given us a nice sharpening choil here with plenty of clearance. Particularly look at this edge of the handle here. This allows you to actually sharpen the knife fully without disassembling it first. So that's very nice. Next thing, I love the texturing on the side of this knife here. Not only because it provides excellent texturing without being too grippy or pocket eating, and it disappears by the time you get to the clip, but it's also very attractive to me. I think this makes for a very interesting sort of, I don't know, it's got a really neat aesthetic to it. I almost view it as like Matrix-y lines of code, but then again, I stare at code too damn much, so there you go. But I like very much the design on this guy, and the knife really does feel like it is designed. I mean, it's well done in a number of ways. You get things like this blade guard here. I mean, I feel like they've really spent a lot of time thinking about this knife in a variety of ways, and it absolutely shows, so that's very nice. Next thing, this is a very easy-to-carry knife. Most out-the-front autos are, because it's just quite literally a little rectangle. There's nothing really prominent sticking out of here. It requires a great deal of force to push this, to deploy the knife, and so you're not accidentally going to trigger it or anything, and so you just end up with this little rectangle that's in your pocket, hanging deeply with a nice standard Benchmade deep carry clip here, which works like a charm, and that's really all you got. And so this knife is very, very nice for carry. It's even more compact, for instance, than your Spyderco Delica, a little bit longer, but way thinner, and the profile is very small. So that's great. And of course, because the blade is entirely within there, the knife is entirely safe while it's closed. So that's really, really excellent. Next thing, ergonomically speaking, I like this a lot in a couple of ways. I mean, it feels good in the hand, absolutely 100%. There's no real concern. The thumb, this little switch here, almost provides a little bit of a thumb ramp, and it's nicely designed in such a way that you can grip it in this way. And so that's good. But I think that these spine fire automatics, where the button is on the spine rather than in the center, like for instance the Benchmade Infidel, I think that's a much more ergonomic way to go. Because with those kinds of knives, what you have to do is deploy it like this and then rotate the knife in your hand. Whereas this guy, you pull it out of your pocket, you deploy, and you're in the position already where you need to be for actually cutting things. So it's a little quicker, and frankly, it just feels a little bit nicer. Makes the knife thinner on the whole. This is a great little design for that. And it's got the nice blade guard. Everything's nicely rounded, too. You can see there are chamfers just all over this little guy here. I mean, even the jimping is chamfered on the side. They've done a good job. So that's great. Next thing, this has a feature that's pretty common in out-the-front automatic knives, but it has sort of a safety stop. Single-action knives do not. They just have a spring that pushes everything through. But these double actions, watch this. This is just a normal piece of paper. Nothing, up my sleeve here, so to speak. But if I press the knife out, you can see that it doesn't actually even penetrate the paper. What happens instead is that the knife kind of goes off the rails. If you watch, you can reset it just by pulling it the rest of the way out. If you watch my disassembly video, you can see how that works. But basically what this means is that even if this were to fire in your pocket, you're going to get cut 100%, but it's not going to be as brutal as, some of the single actions, which will just go right through the hand. So I like that safety feature very much, and I think it's a good idea, 100%. Next thing, at least in some situations, if you are thinking about this combatively, maybe that's not a good thing, but I am not, so it's good for me. Anyways, construction on this guy is A-okay. You have nice machinings around the gap here. I mean, if you look closely, you can see that there is, in fact, a gap between the top and the bottom pieces, but it's actually hard to tell from afar. This is greatly chamfered, and I've honestly not heard any complaints from anybody else about quality control issues here. Is the blade centered? I have no freaking clue, so I'm just going to go ahead and say yes. So if they are all like this, maybe Benchmade is coming back, and I really, really hope that's the case. This is a nicely made knife, and they deserve credit for that. Next thing, the fidget factor is off the freaking charts. As my fiance will attest, this process of making this review is this, over and over and over again, to the extent where, this knife could absolutely stimulate the divorce or two here and there. But it's something. There is a serious fidget to it that I do appreciate. Then finally, finally, the biggest advantage I think that the Phaeton has in the out-the-front auto market is how friendly that it and the company are to the user here. What I mean by that is, on this knife, you can see here they are using Torx screws throughout. It's just one size of Torx screw, and that's all. So any knife nerd should have bits for T6. The disassembly is pretty straightforward. As if you watched that video, you saw that, even to do at home. You're allowed to sharpen the knife at home, which, duh. And if there is a bigger problem with the knife, if something does happen, if something breaks, you have Benchmade Service Division on tap. And no matter their other sins as a company, nobody has ever been able to cast aspersions at Benchmade's customer care. Their warranty and service division is top of the freaking line. And so the Phaeton will be supported by this same group of people, which should mean, if other people's as well, my own experience with Benchmade service, that you're going to have quick and speedy, efficient service there. And it's from a big company with an established long-term record of warranty support, which we can be sure is going to be around for years to come. And so considering that an out-the-front knife can absolutely be vulnerable to dirt and mud and grime getting up into the action, I wouldn't even consider buying a knife that I can't service myself, and I do think that it's worth paying a small premium for a good warranty from a reliable company to get that peace of mind, especially on something this expensive. So to me, those are the biggest advantages of the Phaeton, that is. That it is very nicely made for the user, both to maintain, and it's got a great warranty behind it. The fidget factor is off the charts. The construction is A-okay. It's got that nice little safety feature, which means that it's going to be awfully hard to stab things you don't intend to. Don't stab things unless they're, envelopes and whatnot. Beside the point, it's more ergonomic than the Infidel and a lot of other out-the-front knives. I think it's nicely done there. It's very easy to carry. It's very nicely designed, and the blade on the whole is pretty damn good. Let's talk about what's great here. Okay, to me, what is absolutely great about any out-the-front knife, but, I noticed it specifically on this guy, is the accessibility aspect. People look at Switchblade, out-the-front, automatic, oh my god, death, murder, violence! But the thing is, the biggest and the best use for a knife like this is accessibility. It's for people who have trouble using other knives that require two hands or require incredible dexterity with one of them. What I mean by this is, for starters, the knife is completely ambidextrous. All you need to do is swap the clip to the other side, and a lefty will have the exact same experience as a righty. I can manipulate this knife just fine with my left hand, and that's unusual because I am not very skilled with my left hand. But more importantly, this is a truly one-handed knife. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of knives can be used one-handed. I mean, I can make this guy open and close with one hand, but they involve things like swings out and swings back, or with like a back lock. Very often you're doing things like trying to kind of and you're manipulating your grip and whatnot, and even, a titanium frame lock sort of affair, there is an element of fine motor control here. Dig your thumb in, get your thumb out of the way, etc. Whereas on this guy, really, one-handed is so damned easy. It works just 100% perfectly every time in any position, just with one hand, with very little fine motor control. You just push your thumb, pull your thumb, case freaking closed. And there's no need for clearance or movement beyond the blade. So that makes this an absolutely excellent choice for somebody who is just using one hand or just using one arm, or who has limited dexterity on both. Because again, this requires relatively little fine motor control to deploy. Or, of course, maybe a little bit more commonly, somebody who finds themselves constantly needing a knife with their other hand occupied. If you're constantly carrying a scanner in one hand and on the other side you need to cut open boxes to scan things in, this might be a great combo because you don't have to walk around with the knife deployed and whatnot. So you have all kinds of accessibility functions for a knife like this. And so that's the very best thing, and that's the great part about this and pretty much any out-the-front knife, is that accessibility. This is a great knife for people with different physical needs or with constantly full hands. And this is a great option from a mainstream brand for that. Let's talk about what's bad. Okay, so on the bad side, first I got some nitpicks. The blade on this guy is asymmetrical. You can see here that it's coming out of one side, not the other. You get used to it pretty quickly, but it drove me a little bit nuts, I'll be honest there. Speaking of things that drove me a little bit nuts, this button here being loose made the disassembly way more complicated than it needed to be. I kind of wish that were a little bit more cleverly designed, such that couldn't come loose, something like that. I don't know. Not a big deal, but it's a deal. Next thing, the blade proportions on this guy are a little bit odd. I mean, if you look at the knife, it's got relatively wide knife, relatively small blade, and especially at the front here. I get it. I understand why it needs to be that way, but it's still a little bit odd to me, and the knife as a whole looks a little bit strange. Big, bulky handle, little tiny blade. Whatever, not a big deal there. Next thing, I gotta say that the grind on this guy isn't super impressive. It says 30V, which is a great steel, but it's a little bit thick behind the edge. They haven't ground it very aggressively. I'd like to see a little more hollow to this grind so you get something that cuts a little bit better than this guy does. I mean, as you can see here, it'll cut, but it mostly relies on sort of that puncturing thing to cut. So I'd love to see that done better. Next thing, and this is more of a disadvantage of any out-the-front automatic knife, is that there is no discrete way to deploy this blade. This has one setting, which is yippee-ki-yay. It will fire out there loud and proud, and I do mean loud, because seriously. And so if you're just using this guy in the lunchroom, it will attract attention, and it is not subtle at all. This just screams Switchblade. And that is a serious advantage in many environments of using an out-the-side automatic knife, like this guy. This is the ProTech Magic here. But it has the advantage that if you want to, you can always kind of two-hand open it like that, where you put your hands in the right position to kind of catch the blade and then open it just like any other pocket knife. That way, if you want and you need the automaticity, you can fire it that way. But if you don't, you can always be a little more subtle about it, and no one's the wiser. And so that is a disadvantage of the out-the-fronts, is that there is just one way to deploy this, and that is loud and proud. Then finally, on the bad side, the price on this guy is very high. Holy crap, $300 is a lot of money. $315 once you start getting into other versions and whatnot. In terms of credible, well-made out-the-front autos, I think this is pretty much in the middle of the pack. This isn't one of those cases of, oh my God, Benchmade, what are you smoking with that price point? point. But the thing is, $300 buys you a lot of really high-quality knives, especially in non-automatic sorts of things. So you are 100% paying a premium in any brand for the snick, snick, snick sort of motion. You can get cheapy automatic knives that work okay, but tend to have major problems, or you can pay a bunch of money, like this here. And so that is absolutely a lot of money here. And that, in turn, is the bad, is that $300 is a bunch of cash, even though relative to the rest of the market, that's about what they cost. There is no way to discreetly deploy the blade. The thin stock is not nearly as aggressively ground as I'd like to see. The loose button drove me a bit nuts. The blade proportions are a little weird. And then the blade is asymmetrical, which is crazy. Let's talk about the ugly here. To me, what is deeply ugly about this knife is unfortunately deeply ugly about damn near every out-the-front automatic, and that is blade play. If you hold the knife like this and you shake, it shakes. And if you hold it like this, yeah, there's shake-a-tude there. This is true of every out-the-front automatic knife I've handled with one exception, and that's the Deadlock by Grant and Gavin Hawk. I'm trying to get one of those guys in for review, by the way. But anyways, all of these out-the-front knives have it. I understand structurally why it's really hard to avoid, and I'm very curious to figure out how the Hawks did avoid it. But I gotta say, and to be clear, it is absolutely, there's not a safety issue here. There's nothing I can do with the blade out that will make this knife disengage, short of that. But, oh man, as a high-end knife guy, where blade play is just like deal breaker number one, and so it just makes out the fronts to me feel really janky, even when they're well constructed like this guy. And that's ugly, and I hope that in the future that gets fixed a little bit more often. Better designs are used to eliminate that. So that's the uglies, that considerable blade play. Anyways, let's go to your final conclusion here. Look, final conclusion, this is actually a surprisingly good out-the-front knife. I went to a store and I tried this with some knives from the competition, so to speak. And I gotta say, it does compete well in terms of build quality. It's a solid knife compared to comparable price points. And most of the problems that this guy has, like the blade play, like the cost, etc., are also problems from other out-the-front knives. I mean, this is certainly not unique in its areas of mediocrity. But it does lack some of the major deal breakers associated with other models and companies in the out-the-front world. So if you're after an out-the-front auto, I have no trouble recommending this guy. I think this is a really solid piece. It's got a nice action, and it's well designed. That said, I gotta say, I'm still not a convert to the out-the-front automatic way of life. For me, even though they're legal here now, the legal issues involved with, like, crossing state lines, the intimidation factor, which is very real for some people in some worlds, the loudness of deployment, related, and the blade play just add up to a little bit more trouble than it's worth. I mean, it's a handy tool, absolutely, and maybe if I moved in a world that was populated by people who didn't fear these kinds of tools, I'd be more able to enjoy it and embrace it. But the thing is, I'm yet to have a situation where I felt compellingly like an OTF was worth that pain, was worth the extra trouble, and particularly given the cost, worth the extra money. You can buy a lot of knife for $300 if you don't need it to go snick, 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 snick. But the thing is, if you do have physical constraints that make this a much more, enticing sort of option, or you have consistently full hands, or some other situation, and by the way, if you love out-the-front autos, let me know why down in the comments. That's a great thing for viewers to hear. But in that case, if you're looking for one of these specifically, then by God, this is a pretty good choice for you. And I think it is absolutely Phaeton for a good review. Yeah, I know. It's called Phaeton. I can't do much better, guys. Anyways, hope this was interesting to you, that it was an automatic thumbs up, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.